So what if seeming traits of a pathology were hailed from entirely different places than would be your typical pathology? I read an article about psychopathic behavior, or it was actually a blog, and it really upset me because it was saying that psychopaths mirror people, observe how other people act and behave and mirror them in order to manipulate them. Psychopaths aren't the only people who mirror. If one can't read people very well in a typical way, they can't read surface social cues, they feel like foreign or alien and they have to kind of watch in order to, play the game and fit in socially. That's not manipulating. That's coping. Like these ignorant, cynical NT clinicians really need to learn how to tell the difference. This, especially not being able to tell the difference from their point of view, happens a lot to women on the autistic spectrum because we are insidious and very precocious, and so much so that it's at a near savant level of being able to socially perform and say and do and those seemingly right things, but then there's a little slight error of performance, and that is what gets accused of manipulation, being manipulative or being witchy or whatever. Hence how many of us were burned at the stake in the old times. I'm sure many of those ladies were Aspie women. There are different but subtle differences that cause ignorant, subjectively one-dimensionally perceptive people to misinterpret and misjudge Aspie adults, autistic adults. And it's almost like we can't win in a way, because if we're trying to pass for NT and we're too tired or not quite able to do it in a way that is perfect, we get judged for being apparently manipulative or weird, sinister in some way. It's usually what it's read as, or like awkward or just misperceived, when it's really nothing but a poor Aspie trying to be a good actor, not because they're lying, but because they have to fit in. Doesn't mean that what they're saying is a lie. It doesn't mean that what they mean is a lie. It just means that they can't say it in a way that you're going to understand, so they have to say it in a way that you're going to understand. And that part is the part that is acted, including the emotional execution, the social execution, the reciprocity. Okay, so difference between actor Aspie and manipulator. It's not the same thing. And just put yourself in our shoes for a minute and imagine what it's like to try really hard to please you and then be called or thought of as sinister and manipulative. Even if it's not intended to be kind of sadistic, it sort of feels a little bit like it is. And it's damaging. being accused of being a liar, like I just said. What else gets accused of being a liar down to nitty-gritty details? Flat effect. Flat effect doesn't need to be an obvious, hi, my name's Joe, and I really like math and science. No. I have a flat effect. I have tested to have a significant flat effect. And as a little girl, my dad couldn't tell if I liked my presents or not when I opened my presents. You know, I had a stoic look on my face. If I wanted to be held or whatever, I'd smile a little bit, look down, you know, stoic, coy, kind of subtle, and I'd go up. And I wouldn't really make eye contact. And my parents had a really hard time, adults had a really hard time sort of, they just thought I was an overly well-behaved baby. And I actually was suffering from not being able to. So later, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, I was wanted my Sailor Moon stuff and, you know, fixations and meltdowns coming home from school. And earlier I had been quite flat. And so I'm kind of almost several years behind in my emotional, expressive language. I have, but then of course my mother was very crazy. No, anyway, very French Canadian and talked a lot with her hands and had big expressions. So I learned to emulate that eventually. And in a way, it was probably a good thing. That was one good thing about her. I needed that. Otherwise, I didn't understand. That's why I felt really lost in school. When I first started to go to school, I was so nervous and anxious. I peed my pants on the 3rd day and didn't even tell the teacher. Just had a meltdown a week and a half in. Was sent out into the hallway with my, you know, covering my face. I wouldn't get out of the chair covering my face like this. I had to be picked up. Anyway, not to get too into that, but I have a partial flat effect. And what makes me so angry about that is that that's not my fault. But people interpret it as that I'm feeding you a bullshit line when I talk, or when I'm, especially when I get emotional. That is where my problem with alcohol came in. I needed to emotionally release, and I was literally told, including by my mother, crocodile tears. I remember it well. There's still a sore spot in my heart for being called crocodile tears and faker and all this when I was actually hurting. And when I was 17, 18, 19, and I was showing up at the psych ward, freaking out, having meltdowns after fighting with friends or at a party or anything I didn't understand, I'd have meltdowns. These idiots just said, oh, she's borderline and all the bipolar. And then they finally said, oh, she has an adjustment disorder. One psychiatrist actually sort of got it right. And he said, well, I question pervasive development, but she makes okay eye contact and she speaks well. And then he ruled it out, tragically, when I needed help so bad at that time. I'm lucky that I survived encountering some of the creeps that I encountered. It was like Pinocchio on Treasure Island. It was really bad. And I definitely had donkey ears and a tail. Sorry. I like my analogies. Anyway. Back to the flat effect. When I am emotional and I cry, my expressive language is sort of simple It's like, and, to you, to them, it looks childish, one-dimensional, melodramatic. My eyes are sort of half flat and half emotional, and it looks like I'm acting, but I'm not acting and I'm feeling. It's the way that I express my emotions is odd, juvenile, and odd. But they're real. My heart is real. My anger is real. My hurt is real. My grief is real. And there's nothing more painful than having real emotions and being treated as though you're just being a freaking histrionic and putting them on. Nothing worse. Nothing more hurtful. So nothing more hurtful than trying to say the right words and you're pretty close. Sometimes you're too good. And because you're too good, because you're using that intellect, and you're falling short on the emotional bit and the execution bit and the expressive language bit and the reciprocity bit and those little details, those little aspects. But you have the words right and very right, and it sounds like a script. This is all interpreted as you're some sort of sinister creep. Two sides to this here. Way over in left field, poor Aspie trying to act more neurotypical and be acceptable to you and understandable and to translate. We're doing all the work. What's funny is they would say you can't read our surface social cues. Well, you can't read ours. This isn't an us and they thing. There's a lot of people who aren't necessarily autistic that when the heart is there and the compassion is there and the minds are open, I have been able to successfully communicate with typical people that are not autistic, depending on whom and how close I am with them. Autistic community right now has its own struggles, and we're all dealing with trauma and this and that. I'm not getting into that right now. Think in our minds is a different language, so we're going to express divergently, and it's going to be like I said in my blog on Roomtime Rambles, my blog on my site, I called it a proverbial accent. And that's what it is. What you're seeing in our awkward expressions and our idiosyncrasies, it's part of our proverbial accent. It's not a pathology. It's a combination of our proverbial accent and our precocity in terms of our attempt to communicate with you. I gotta have some hot chocolate here. It's not hot anymore, it's warm chocolate. Better. Way over on the left field is the Aspie, and way over on that right field is the psychopath, sociopath, narcissist. What's really ironic is, firstly, Aspies are most vulnerable to the sociopath narcissist type, for one. And I won't even say like sociopath, narcissist, whatever. This is all language from the DSM. I don't really want to use that because people who are damaged and traumatized, Aspies, autistic people, well, we're just like everyone else. We'll have personality quirks, and we'll have developed trauma that causes comorbid character defects, and sometimes, unfortunately, when we're not actively trying to recover, and especially if we took on unhealthy coping mechanisms like addictions, or, just not dealing with our internal stuff. And we can take on pseudo traits of things like borderline and narcissism and mood disorder. And, yes, but that's not the same thing as being a sociopathic narcissistic personality or sociopathic personality type. It's not the same. And DSM almost needs to separate it. There's a difference between struggling and having hang-ups. And really that's what they should be called. I prefer to use the language in therapeutic approaches like cognitive or 12-step or whatever, rather than using language from the DSM to describe people that are afflicted. But when I'm talking about psychopathic, sociopathic types, I guess I could use that language. That's where it might be appropriately applied. But what I'm trying to say is that, ironically, for one, Aspies are most prone to be vulnerable to those types, and for another, secondly, those types are actually much better at social performance than the Aspie, because the Aspie is kind of awkward, and that's why they're the ones that are falsely accused of being the liars and the manipulators. And it's actually the real liars and manipulators are much more subtle. And what is interesting is that even though in the beginning, when the Aspie is young and naive, they're vulnerable to that kind of person, once they've been hurt by them, they learn to recognize them. At least I do. And I can smell that kind of person from a mile away. I know who they are. I know what they're doing. I can see what they're doing in terms of how they're watching in order to socially perform. Why? Because I do it too, but I do it to cope. I don't do it with a sinister agenda. I do it because I don't fucking know how to act around neurotypical people in a way that is going to be... But at the same time, now that I don't want to do it as much, or I do it less at least. I definitely don't do it like I used to. I can't. I don't have the energy. I just want to be me. And I don't care, if my expressions are, eccentric or, childlike.